You know, Josh, we do have an interesting Sleeping Beauty Castle piece over here in the hallway at the office. This is just a merchandise item, but for the 50th anniversary of Disneyland, they sold this collectible pin with this picture of Walt. And there's a model of the Matterhorn, but also there's a model of Sleeping Beauty Castle.
You're right. I never noticed. That's a really early model of the castle, too. That's not a 1959 sort of as-built Sleeping Beauty Castle. I wonder what ever happened to that.
Uh-oh. Welcome to the very first episode of Materially Disney. I'm Tom. This is Josh.
Hey, Tom.
And Josh, this is something we've talked about for a long, long time. I know if you're a longtime viewer, you probably heard us mention the name of this show over the last 6 or 7 years, but here we finally are.
6 or 7 years later.
Yeah.
Yeah. Disneyland got built faster than this show did.
It did. If you watched Disneyland Handcrafted, you know that.
This has been, I mean, we're both collectors.
We're stuff guys.
Yeah. And I think what we figured out, and I think that the journey that we're going to take you on today is telling stories about Disney history and about Disney present through stuff. Because it turns out that stuff sticks around and it has a lot to share with us.
Speaking of those stories, we're going to tell those stories through Materially Disney. Over the course of this episodic series, we'll talk about whether it be an attraction, a person, a park, something. There'll be some topic that we focus on and tell the story of that topic through the stuff.
And this is a great place to invite you to leave comments, write into us, get in touch with us, contact us, and share your stuff. Share your stuff and the stories behind it so that we can talk about those sorts of things as well.
Yeah, and I want to make it clear that it's not just about the profound, amazing, historic stuff. Just important is your stuff, the stuff that has a story that's personal to you, like the parent that bought you a particular souvenir from your first trip to Walt Disney World, or something you have from a certain resort stay that's memorable. Things like that are just as important. That memory of yours and that emotional connection are just as important as the big historical things we'll talk about on this show.
So for all you stuff people out there, welcome to Materially Disney.
You've brought stuff.
Today, well, this is the first episode of what I assume to be 1,000 episodes. And how do you got to start something off the right way?
We have to start at the beginning.
Yeah.
Or before the beginning in some cases.
Well, I think that's a good place to start usually.
Yeah.
And I think you got to start big and, well, or 70 feet worth of big.
Big for that time.
That's right. Sleeping Beauty Castle. It is Disneyland. It is the visual cue for Disneyland and, frankly, the visual cue for a lot of the Disney company. Where did it come from? Because we take it for granted, I think. There's always been a castle in the middle of the park. You walk down Main Street and there it is. You walk down any Main Street and there it is.
Well, what's funny is the Walt Disney Company obviously exists before Disneyland opens. And the castles are a part of that legacy, but they're not necessarily the focal point before Disneyland.
I think that's right. I think that the castle was a destination as part of storytelling. Mm-hmm. And here, the castle becomes a character. And certainly in the last 70 years, we've made the castle into a character by decorating it for the holidays, by using it as a focal point for nighttime spectaculars and fireworks and things like that. It's taken on a life of its own. There's not a person who visits Disneyland and doesn't get a photo, that iconic family photo, in front of where? The castle. Let's think about before there was a Disneyland being constructed, before we, all that beautiful footage in Leslie's Disneyland Handcrafted, before we watched that castle that looks like stone come up out of mostly wood, how did it come about? And I think what we have here is sort of the cool stuff that tells that story. I went to my archive and pulled a selection of things that had to do with Sleeping Beauty Castle. And so on the table, just to give you kind of a survey of what we're going to talk about and the history that's going to come alive, is we've got some brown line plans of Sleeping Beauty Castle. Now these are copies, but they're copies that were made as working copies in the 1950s, 1953, 54, during the earliest days of WED, which was the precursor to Walt Disney Imagineering. These are both drawn by Marvin Davis. And Marvin Davis is sort of one of those unsung, lesser-known heroes.
It's a name enough people don't know.
There's a lot of Davises, too.
Yeah.
I mean, Mark Davis is a great Davis. Marvin Davis, an equally great Davis, I would argue. He designs the hub concept. He does the master planning for Walt Disney World eventually. And one of the things that I don't think is well known is that in the earliest days of Disneyland's development, 1953, he's doing elevations and designs for Fantasyland primarily, some Main Street as well, but Fantasyland and specifically Sleeping Beauty Castle. So that's those. What else we have is, two other things. These both come from the prospectus. So there's meetings with bankers and financiers and potential lessees.
All things that get brought up a lot when you listen to the story of how Disneyland happens, because the Walt Disney Company didn't have the money on their own to do this.
Right. And so those had to be supported by some words and some visuals that gave a sense of what Disneyland was going to be, because it was a first of its kind venture. It was a theme park. No one knew what a theme park was.
Amusement parks were what existed, and all the people that ran those told these people that what they were doing was wrong.
That's right.
Yeah.
All the people that ran those told these people that what they were doing was wrong.
Yeah.
Anyone who could get Walt aside for 5 minutes told him that this was a terrible idea. I mean, that is the legendary story is, why shouldn't you do this? And this was the sort of dream that brought the Disney company, I think, home. If Mickey started down that road, I think there's actually a rather famous quote. It was a Walt quote that said, it was all started by a mouse, but it was Disneyland, it was the castle that brought us home. And so there's just to give you an idea, there's a rendering that we're going to talk about of Sleeping Beauty Castle printed on photographic paper, and these were handed out. Think New York boardroom, packet of photos being passed around the table of what Walt envisioned this to be. And then one of my sort of favorite things to sort of look at and read, and if you want to grab it and hand it to me, this is the Disneyland story. So the Disneyland story comes about in 1953. It goes through a couple revisions. This one happens to be from 1954, and it explains what Disneyland is to people who don't know what we're talking about. They don't have 70 years of theme park heritage behind them. They're sitting and trying to figure out whether or not they should give money to this project. My favorite part about this is this line. The theme of Disneyland is that when you park your car in the auto park, you leave the present day behind. And when you enter Disneyland, you will find yourself in the land of yesterday, tomorrow, and fantasy. Nothing of the present exists at Disneyland. Now, there's a pencil notation on here that I really love. It says, comma, except money, which means that this was in a banker's file. Yep. So let's turn the page and let's get into Fantasyland, because Fantasyland talks about what Sleeping Beauty Castle is. You enter Fantasyland through the Sleeping Beauty Castle. This castle will stand 70 feet high. As you go through the archway, you find yourself in the courtyard of the castle. In the center of the courtyard will be the King Arthur Carousel, this being in keeping with the Sleeping Beauty Castle. You can also go through the castle, and by looking through the various windows, you will see Sleeping Beauty, the dungeon with the rack and the wheel, and the torture chambers, the large dining hall of the knights, and all the things you would expect to find in a castle will be there. That's a pretty cool description, because I think we know that not a lot of that actually happened
No.
in Sleeping Beauty Castle.
A Sleeping Beauty Castle walkthrough eventually happens, which tells you the story of Sleeping Beauty, but no, the other things you would find in a castle are not present.
And that opens in 1957.
Yep.
Right, so that's 2 years before the film, which is ultimately released in 1959. In 1953, we're thinking about that film, but we have no idea what it's really going to entail from a visual storytelling perspective. It's not until 57 where the Ivan Durrell sort of designed walkthrough gives the public a hint at what was about to come in theaters in 1959. Should we dig into this, though? I'd love to sort of talk about this stuff.
What good is artwork if we're not going to heavily examine the concept art?
That's right. That's right. So if you notice that this front elevation extends way further out than the Sleeping Beauty castle that ultimately gets built. And it's because these castle walls were going to encircle, and Fantasyland was going to effectively be inside the castle walls. Mm-hmm. And you see that from a side elevation, which is this one up here. So you're looking at the castle from the side, and what you're seeing is not just the castle, but the entryway to the Snow White ride, which is a continuation of the castle. And we know that, like, eventually, this isn't what Fantasyland ever looked like. Mm-hmm. I mean, in 1983, Tony Baxter comes and redoes Fantasyland and turns it into something that's far closer to this.
The idea is to do what Walt could not do in the 1950s.
Right, but in the 1950s, 1955, opening day Disneyland, Fantasyland was sort of this medieval tent, medieval fair theme, because it turned out that was the most budget-friendly way to get it across the finish line, from a time perspective, from a money perspective, from a this is what we could do perspective, because the focus was largely on the inside and getting those attractions built, which opening day, it was, the carousel, obviously, Snow White, Mr. Toad, and famously the Peter Pan fly-through attraction. All of which were sort of originally planned to be affiliated in and around the castle structure itself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so this Snow White facade is quite, again, somewhat similar to what Tony Baxter would do with his team in the 1980s, but that is way beyond what was there in 1955.
It was, absolutely. The interesting thing, and the thing I wanted to draw your attention to today, is when we say objects tell stories, well, this is great, right? We see a castle, we see the renderings, we see concept, we see a lot of concept art of things that were that end up different because of budget, because of, concept art is the dream, right? And then it takes a lot of steps to get to the reality and the manifestation of an attraction or something. But the details in this concept art are not the details in the drawings, they're the details in the bottom corners. And what I love about this is concept art, it's very infrequently signed. Disney was never really a company that, it was a collective endeavor, and the art was for sort of storytelling and communicating, and it wasn't really sort of, but Marvin Davis, who was a draftsman by trade, signed these, and so M.A. Davis in the bottom corner, and the interesting thing about them is he also dated them. So then, with that date, we have a sense of what the project what was happening on the project and how it was developing, and what the timeline, the creative timeline was, because it's pretty vague when you think about it. Imagineering gets founded in 1952 as WED Enterprises. It's wholly owned by Walt Disney. It's not affiliated with the studio. And
He's keeping it a secret.
Walt's dividing his time between WED and the studio, and there's some friction and tension with Roy, which a famous sort of period of not really talking to one another, actually, and then it ends in the exchange of a peace pipe, a physical peace pipe, and things kind of come back together, and WED gets acquired by the entity, the Walt Disney Productions entity. But we don't really know beyond that as a starting point and the opening day. There's very few dates in that timeline that are known and that are sort of landmarks for us.
Not a lot of concrete between 52 and 55.
Right. There is one date, though, right? There's that one date, and that's that's the sort of famous origin story of Disneyland as a project to be pitched and as a thing to be worked through. And that's September 26th, 1953.
The Lost Weekend.
Right.
Yeah.
Tell the story.
Well, the story that I've been told, and I'm sure you know the same,
Yeah.
is that Walt Disney called Herbie Ryman, tremendous artist, and asked Herbie, I've got this on Monday. I've got to go to the bank and pitch them this idea of Disneyland, and I need to show them what it is. I need a piece of art to show them what my idea, what my concept is. Herbie, will you do it? And Herbie went back and forth with him. Is like, it's not enough time. I don't know what this is. And Walt said, well, if I stand over your shoulder, will you do it? And Herbie reluctantly, finally, as the story goes, said yes. And that over that weekend, there was very little sleep, supposedly. And then by the time the weekend was over, Herbie created the first full rendering of Disneyland Park.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's a good story, isn't it?
It's the one we've been told.
It just comes out of Herbie's head. All of these things that eventually carry forward and become Disneyland. The castle and Main Street and True Life Adventureland and Tomorrowland, and all of these things are just sort of manifested in this bird's eye view that goes back east with Roy to sell to the bankers to get the financing, and the rest, as they say, is history. And that drawing on vellum, which is cleaned up a little bit over that weekend, becomes the origin story for all of those things, for Disneyland and its constituent elements. But that's September 26, 1953. Here's the fun thing. These are dated August 4th, 1953 for this one, and this one, which is the castle. It's Sleeping Beauty Castle. You show this to anybody and they recognize it as the castle, kind of, is dated July 21st, 1953.
Wow. So what you're telling me is Herbie's story that he had a blank sheet of paper and drew Disneyland, it's the first rendering, is not correct.
Herbie had a blank sheet of paper.
The blank sheet of paper existed.
That's absolutely true.
But he had, are you saying he had reference to work off of?
And Herbie certainly fit these constituent elements together to create this bird's eye view that communicated through visual storytelling, as only Herbie Ryman could, the feeling of a place. But Herbie was also equipped with a couple years worth of work that were done by people like Dick Irvine and Marvin Davis, the two sort of earliest creative employees at WED. And I think that's a really interesting thing to unpack, is that there was a park that was being designed before September 26, 1953. So much so that the castle as we know it, Sleeping Beauty Castle, exists in plan and concept form before Herbie Ryman sits and puts pencil to paper, pencil to vellum.
So Walt Disney knew what the heart of his park was and already had people well at work designing it.
That's right. And that's a really interesting thing. It's a wrinkle to that sort of the myth and the legend of the Lost Weekend. There's a park before there's a park, it turns out, as it were. And I think that's the way that objects can tell us stories. These are all really cool, Tom, aren't they?
I would say so.
Yeah. I mean, I love this early Disneyland stuff.
So we're going to stay and look at these for another half hour, right?
I have another thing that I brought today, though. And I think this thing might help complete the castle story, let's say.
Well, let's look at it.
All right, let's get it.
Josh, I think I know what this is. And if it's what I think it is, why is it here?
You said that we should start Materially Disney with a bang. Something really oomphy, right? And so I thought maybe this was the thing that we should focus on.
I don't even want to breathe this close to it.
This is the original model of Sleeping Beauty Castle. This is the first one. This is the thing that started it all. This was Marvin Davis's concept, right? He, as we talked about, and we looked at the plans, and we looked at the drawings, and we looked at the documentation. A lot of what Sleeping Beauty Castle is started with Marvin Davis, and this is it. This is the three-dimensional realization of that. And back when WED was a couple guys, one of those couple guys was a model builder named Fred Jerger. Fred Jerger, Wathel Rogers, Harriet Burns were sort of the three people who founded the Walt Disney Imagineering model shop. And you needed to have models. Models are visual storytelling. Concept art is great. Story treatments are wonderful. But to build something physical, you need to build something physical in miniature first.
In a world pre-computers, this was an absolute necessity.
Yeah. And so this is the thing that started it all. I don't know that there are enough sort of ways to lavish praise on what this is in the context of Disneyland, in the context of Disney parks, in the context of the Disney company. It's balsa wood and paint and glue, and I mean, it's survived the ages pretty well, actually.
I think it's easily more than the sum of its parts.
I think that's probably true.
But to go back to my original question, why is it here?
Well, it's here because it's part of my archive of material. It's part of my collection. That's why.
Why do you have this?
Oh, I really like Disneyland.
That's it. Bye, everybody. How does this leave?
But how is it in the wild?
Yeah.
I think that's the question, right?
Yeah.
Well, so the story goes that this lived for the longest time on Walt's desk in his working office. It was his model of Sleeping Beauty Castle. It's the first one. It's not... when they build the park, there's a larger working model that it has a really interesting story in and of itself. It sort of gets tucked away at Imagineering. It gets discovered or rediscovered by an Imagineer named John Stone, who is a brilliant model builder. And I'm going to guarantee that we talk about him in a future episode.
Or many future episodes.
Quite possibly.
Yeah.
But as a labor of love, John Stone painstakingly restored that model. And it lived for a period of time in the Disney Gallery, which was up above Pirates of the Caribbean and New Orleans Square. That was in 1987 when they opened the Disney Gallery. The model was on display there, and now it lives at One Man's Dream. But that model is Sleeping Beauty Castle as it was built, not necessarily as it was imagined. And this is Sleeping Beauty Castle as it was imagined in 1953. So this model is before the Lost Weekend. It's the model that's based on Marvin Davis's plans, and it's hand-built by Fred Jerger. It lives on Walt's desk. It's his memento, as it were, of Disneyland, although he had a few mementos of Disneyland. It was his park, had his name on it. It ends up getting gifted to Marvin Davis after Walt's death by Roy, who knew...
He was still sitting in the office at that time.
Yeah, it came out of the office in 1966, and it went to Marvin Davis, and it went down the Davis family after Marvin passed. There's a great E-Ticket magazine article where they interview Marvin, and he's posing like a guy who had just caught like the biggest fish in the world with this model. It's a fantastic photo. Great little bit of provenance, right? When you start talking about rare Disney collectibles, provenance and where it came from is a huge part of that. It's a huge part of the story. And then eventually this comes to auction. And it comes to auction in kind of a strange way. It ends up being in an entertainment memorabilia auction full of movie props and costumes and things like that. It's the only Disneyland item in the auction. And it sells, and
To you.
I ended up being the high bidder on it. Yeah, I mean, so that's not like a great story of discovery necessarily, but it's a story of sort of something that's very near and dear to me coming home, I think.
Well, as we chug along through Materially Disney, I think we're going to find there are a number of different stories as to how these things end up outside the Walt Disney Company. Some more interesting than others, but I think there's a lot like your story.
I think that's right. I think that's very true. And I think like just what this symbolizes, Tom, to me, is the genesis of Disneyland. It's before the Lost Weekend. It's when WED was Walt and a couple guys working together to get this thing called a theme park, to get this thing called Disneyland into reality finally, right? This decades-long dream that Walt has of building a theme park. It's the next step in his vision of what entertainment should be. As a master of animation and a master of live action, it's how do we revolutionize storytelling?
What is that next horizon?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's a horizon that, I mean, you and I both know as we look at Disney parks presently, we continue to push. But I don't think there are a handful of things in this world that distill the everything of the Walt Disney Company down to its simplest, sort of most fundamental forms. Walt the man, the talents, the handcrafted talents of Imagineers and designers, Disneyland the place, and the symbolism of Sleeping Beauty Castle. It is the symbol of Disneyland. It's the symbol of every Disney theme park around the world.
It's the symbol in many ways of the company. I know we're of a younger age, but people who grew up, pre-Disneyland, Disney films did not open with a castle at the beginning of them. That is something that comes about later because of how iconic Disneyland and this castle are.
That's right. It is truly the gateway to a land of fantasy and storytelling. And I think it's a really fitting way for us to kick off Materially Disney to say that these are the things that exist in the world, and they tell stories.
And this is, I don't know how we're going to tell a better story than this.
I think we're going to try.
Well, this is an incredible piece. What amazes me is how it's not that far off from what happened. It's really, for being an early vision of this thing, it is Sleeping Beauty Castle. They kind of knew what they were getting into.
What I love about it, too, is that, when you showed me that photograph that you have in the hallway earlier, that's from '59, and that's about sort of designing the Matterhorn, right? So Matterhorn opens in '59. That's a developmental photo. It's probably from a couple years earlier than that. And it's playing around with scale. Like, this was still kicking around the studio and just being used for things like that. Like, well, let's put the castle next to the mountain so that we can see what that looks like.
Its story continues well beyond that opening day of 1955, yeah.
Yeah, no, and just the idea that, of being with something that's so close to Walt the person and Walt's dream of Disneyland, I think that's the romance of this. And to have it be guarded over and cherished by Marvin Davis, one of the legendary very first Imagineers. There's something there that you just can't put to words, and there's something there that you really can't put a price tag on either.
No, absolutely not.
I think in some of our later episodes, we're going to talk about sort of values and prices and things like that, but
this one doesn't. I don't think there is a price.
How about we call this one? We'll call this one priceless.
I think that's fair. I think it has to be priceless because when I look at this, the world we're sitting in right now washes away, and I could just imagine this with Walt Disney and him realizing, I'm going to make my big dream come true. Yeah. And that's what makes this so special.
Yeah. No, you get a little emotional.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, there it is.
Thank you for sharing the most incredible thing I've ever seen. Thank you.
Good stuff.
Yeah, I'd say.
All right.
We've shared our Disney stuff, and now it's time for you to share yours.
If you have a great collection, a great object, a thing that means a lot to you, that if you're a stuff person, we want to know. You should email us, reach out at stuff@wdwnt.com and share your stuff story.
Absolutely. And some of those stories will make it into these episodes.